Hello and welcome to Smooth Musings, a podcast brought to you by Smooth Fusion. And today we're going to start with the first of a three-part series. And in this episode, we're talking about what is an enterprise website and what's the process that we call discovery and design. And then we're going to have an installment about implementation. And then finally, there'll be an installment about launch and ongoing maintenance of a site. And so on each of these, we're going to have we'll be inviting a little bit different group from our team here at Smooth Fusion. And so I want to let you know who we have today. I'm Todd Knowlton, CEO here at Smooth Fusion. And we have our VP of Customer Success, Dylan Echols. Our Director of Business Development, Stephen Collings. Our VP of Production, Janae Allen. Our Director of UX and Design, Brady Miller. Our Director of Marketing, Jake Picken, and our Director of IT, Gary Evans. And just kind of let you know how this is going to go. We're really just going to be skimming the surface today, obviously, of a really big topic. And we do plan to have some follow-up episodes that'll dive deeper into some of these topics that we'll hit today. But if you're a marketer or someone else that's in charge of the rebuild of an enterprise-level site, we want to make you look good and keep you out of the common pitfalls. And so that is really the goal for this series, is to let you know what to expect at each stage of building an enterprise level site so that you can be as successful as possible. So we're going to just kind of jump in here. We've been, our company has been around for 23 years. We've been doing this for a long time, and while we also try to keep up with all the new things going on, we also like to bring along the best practices from the things we've learned. And this group here have been around a long time and have tons of experience in this. And so I think there'll be a lot of good tips and wisdom come out of this today. So we're gonna kick this off just really with Dylan here, just asking Dylan, what's an enterprise website, and how would you define the difference between what we call an enterprise website and maybe your more run-of-the-mill websites out there?
Yeah, so I think an important distinguishing factor of it is the fact that it's enterprise, being that it's for typically an enterprise website will be a website for a large organization, though a medium-sized business may have an enterprise level or scale web application. Generally, how we're talking about it is a website that's built for enterprise organizations. And so those will typically have hundreds of pages or several integration points with like CRMs, knowledge bases, login systems, providers. It could be an intranet. It could be a public-facing website as well. There's really just, in the simplest terms, probably hundreds of pages and quite a bit of complexity.
Okay. Yeah, and so these are large projects. They take a lot of time, and that first step gets called different things probably by different teams, but the a very common name you'll hear out there is discovery and design, and that's that research and planning phase that really has to be done in order to make sure that we know what we're designing and what we're building. So different companies approach that a little bit different ways, but really it's pretty common. There's a lot of, I guess, similarities between the ways that the companies approach discovery and design, because your primary things there are you're trying to make sure that our team understands your needs and the scope of your project. We got to get both our team and our customers' team on the same page about all the different aspects of the project. We ultimately have to design a website that makes sure we've considered all the important things, and all of this is done so that implementation hopefully goes a lot more smoothly. So what we're going to do here with this part of our team is just kind of go around the group. We'll kind of go in order, but may hop around a little bit. But if just want to kind of go around the group and talk about some of the things that are happening during discovery and design from the perspective of each of these folks on the team. So again, I'm going to just start with Dylan again, and you can bring up the things that come to mind for you. But I think the question here is just, what are some of the major things that we're looking to have answers to during this phase?
Yeah. And I think another important characteristic of that I forgot to mention that kind of segues into this is that enterprise applications take time and they take a lot of planning. And so considering that these projects may take months, they may take dozens and dozens of stakeholders input to be able for the idea of the concept to come to fruition. And so whenever you're going into a design and discovery of a project, you obviously have a goal. And so I think one of the most important things is, why are you looking at implementing a new enterprise website? Are you trying to fix some challenges? Are you trying to offload opportunity costs? Are you trying to implement some more integrations with other systems and you're dealing with legacy systems? So really, I think that the first thing is, why are you doing it? Which it connects with some of my other points as well, which is building for scale. So I think an important part is, whenever you're considering rebuilding your web application, especially if it's an enterprise, that you don't want to start piling up technical debt as you're going through it. And so if you're thinking about that your web application is going to become a living application, it's not just a website you're putting out there and then rebuilding in a few years. So you need to consider, how is your company going to scale, and then how are your enterprise applications going to scale alongside it? And when you're in that planning phase of a project, that's really the best opportunity to take care of that, because you just have to think about the different ways you may scale your product inventory. If you're acquiring other product brands, do you need a dedicated off-site database or something? Just different things to consider. And then also, in addition to that, are like pain points of your current website. What are some of the things that you don't want to recreate? Or what are some of the things that you felt like took longer than they should have? Really, you just want to start investigating those kinds of things, because any even micro optimization that you find can be a win, and cascade into a bigger win. And then also, you need to identify really and also, in addition to going into the design and discovery, so you've got your goals, you've got your pain points and things you want to avoid. But then you need to start considering also, like on a literal level, is what is changing from site to site, because that starts to influence your plan. So you may think about how maybe you have too many web pages on your website and content too spread out. So one of your goals is to merge the content. So you need to actually think about, what is the technical impact of that, like the redirects. You have to set up and page title changes, anything along those lines. And then also, I would say the last thing that comes to mind is workflows. Is who's going to be working on the website and how, or who's going to be pulling data from the website. And this kind of goes back to the scale, is understanding which different departments or teams within your organization may have some integration point with your website and need to leverage it. And so that all of the decisions that you're making in reference to your enterprise website are complementing your organization as a whole.
Yeah, Dylan, you mentioned technical debt. If and we could get Janae to answer this, I guess, but give it, just for those who aren't familiar with that term, what do you mean by technical debt?
I would say that there's probably different. Janae can probably give a more sophisticated answer, but the way I would describe it is just trying to find a quick solution or a workaround for something. So an example might be that you have a network of dealers you're trying to add to a map, and you find that some of those dealers operate in their radius of customers isn't necessarily a radius, but maybe it corresponds to a list of zip codes. And so if you're trying to figure out, okay, I want to accommodate these few dealers, do I go ahead and hard code these things, which you have a developer go in the code and put in a literal list of zip codes that they need to show up for in results? Or do we add that to the existing CRM so that any other dealers in the future that may need it will also have that functionality accessible, just turnkey. So in the hard coding solution, every time a new zip code needs to be added or someone else, it's just the cost just sustains itself. It just continues because you're needing somebody to intervene. And so often it's how do we mitigate developer intervention? I would say, and if a task has a high amount of developer intervention, I would say that has a lot of technical debt to it to a degree.
Yeah, so we don't want to come back and redo something just because we did it cheaply the first time or whatever. So, yeah, I think that makes sense. Stephen Collings, our Director of Business Development. I just want to ask you, Stephen, just kind of what are some of the things from your perspective that you want to be making sure we get answers to at this stage?
I think what Dylan was saying is really good. Is a lot of times there's already a process that's already in place, and we need to optimize it. It's not normally a new ask. Sometimes it is, but especially on those ones that are already in place, and we're bringing them to onto the web to, I don't know, make it easier or more accessible to people. It's really thinking, how does this need to change? We don't want to just always do a one for one. So maybe a simplified version of my answer is asking for the why. Like, it's important to continue asking, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Not just to replicate what we already have for the web, but are there ways to optimize? We also talked about like the workflows. So maybe a good example would be everyone's going to a spreadsheet right now to enter information. Well, the better way might be one person enters something, then it sends a notification to the next person that it's their turn. So what's that ideal way of setting all this up? That can lead to a lot of scope creep though too. So it's good to, like in these discovery times, Blackboard, or is it Blackboard still a thing? Do we whiteboard now?
We whiteboard.
So just noting all of that stuff down, and then the next step of that is, okay, we have here's all the scope. We can't do it all at once. We can't build a mansion all at once. Let's just take little steps. So that's called the MVP, most viable product. What's the smallest thing we can launch with just to get something out there? So I think we brainstorm as much as we can, and then from there we figure out what are we going to launch with. So all that goes into the discovery phase, and then from there we start looking at timelines. So once we identify what the scope is, now we can look at, okay, what's the realistic timeline for this? There's a lot of steps into that, and then what's a rough cost, so we can make sure we're still in line with ask.
Yeah, let's talk about budget for a minute. I know a lot of times it's not a customer's favorite thing when a company like us says, "What's your budget?" And I think that's because it comes across as though we're wanting to know what their budget is so we can make sure we spend it all. But talk to us really, what's really the importance of us having some kind of indication of budget at this stage?
Yeah, I used to always hate asking that question, the dreaded question asked. But I've learned that really does help us to give you the right solution. If you have $10,000, well, it might be able to do what you need. But if you had 20, you'll be able to do what you need. Plus, we can add all these bells and whistles. If you're just looking at you just need to do it quick, well, we don't need to add all that in. So knowing what the budget is, and if there's any flex that, what if we did come up with these bigger ideas? Would you want to consider it, or it's just absolute no? So all of that helps us just to give the right recommendation. And it's not just to spend all the money. We want to make our partners look good, like you said, Todd. So that all goes into letting our expertise come into this to provide the recommendation that they need.
Well, and maybe related to that is maybe not everything fits in your budget right now. But even if you have a big budget right now, there's always going to be those things that you think of along the way. So what should a person expect in terms of, what do we do about the things that we think of that might be able to be done in the future?
Yeah, and that goes into a couple of things. One, even in that first discovery call, that's a nice thing about working with a development partner who's done this a long time. One, you're going to get new ideas from rather than just your company who's trying to come up with something else. We can bring in all the different hundreds of websites we've done. So that's going to play into that. So sorry, Tom, what was the original question again?
Well, just the idea of there's always going to be a future phase, right? And so we can save things for a future phase, but you want to also be smart about what you save. We compare this process a lot to building a house, and there's certain things that are reasonable to wait and do in a second phase when you're building a house, but there's certain things that make no sense to wait. If you're going to want your garage a little bit bigger, well, let's do that from day one. Let's not say, oh, later we'll make the garage a foot wider. That'd be a big undertaking for that. So the same thing applies here, right? We've got part of this process is to make sure we're being smart about what do we need to do in this phase versus what are the things that maybe can be held for a future phase.
Yeah, and I think that's where I started off by saying that brainstorming session. I think that's going to help us know like what's your grand goal 5 years from now on your site. So it's important to know that. So as we're architecting, like you said, you don't want to put the basement in your house after the fact. That's going to be expensive. So if we know those 5 years, we're going to eventually do this. We'll architect it in a way or give the recommendation. You might want to do it later, but it really should be done now to save money. So we're always thinking that. And that's where I was going to with our expertise. Even after that first call, it's not going to be right, but we can have a good gut feel of the size of this project. So if your budget's like $50,000, and as we're hearing things like, this is definitely a $200,000 ask, and there's not much way to simplify it down to what you need, we can talk about that right away. So does this need to be a different project altogether, or we can just stop and reevaluate it when it's a better time? So all of that we're considering as we're interviewing the clients and asking about the project.
Yeah, okay, so let's maybe add on.
Oh, go ahead, Dylan.
If you don't mind if I add on to that. I think, one of the things that's important that I didn't really call out is, and that Stephen was alluding to, was the establishing of the MVP. And this isn't most of the time unless you're a new company, your website, I think what you alluded to as well, already is existing, so it's not coming from scratch. So if you're going about identifying your MVP, it's typically what are the current functions that the application performs and that needs to continue to perform. And those will be the basis or the foundation of your MVP. And then you start to use method. I mean, you can use methods like the Moscow method, where it's must have, could have, should have, won't have, if I did that in order. And that's how you can go about, and you usually do that as an exercise with stakeholders to go about determining what needs to be on the application at that time. So just in terms of identifying the MVP, it's not only wants, it's firstly needs and then wants.
Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit here and go to Janae. Janae's our VP of production. She's been with the company, 17 or so years? Something like that. Been started out as a developer, then a software engineer, then the head of our development, now head of all production. But we're not going to do any implementation during this discovery phase, but there are a lot of things we need to make sure we know to, from your perspective, to make sure we're prepared for what's coming. So tell us a little bit about some of the things that you're going to want to know during this discovery session.
Yeah, sure. So I get involved at the time whenever we start thinking about architecting the site or creating a technical architecture. And this architecting the site, that's where we decide, is this going to be like a from the ground up type of website? Is this going to be, maybe it uses a content management system? So really you need to think about who's going to be using the site. What are the requirements that you're wanting? Like if you're going to be making content changes all the time, it's really important for you to have access and not need developer intervention to make content updates. Then maybe you need to go with a content management system. So we'll make some decisions like that as we're architecting the site. Also thinking about your own development squad and your team there, thinking about, eventually are they going to want to take over the development of the site or the maintenance of it? So that'll help you decide like where the source control you want it to be, your database, your hosting, all of that is going to be decided here, along with any kind of integrations you have with other systems, CRMs, or do you pull data from other systems that you want to display on your website, but maybe you don't want to manage that data in this website that you're building? So we'll have some discussions about things like that. So the technical architecture, some of it happens before the design to help make those decisions about things, and sometimes it happens after the design. So once design's complete, then we'll go through and determine how we're going to build some of those things that have been designed. So during this time, I think it's important, as we've alluded to before, is thinking about what's on your site currently. What do you like about it? What are some things some functionality that you need to bring over into the new site? Maybe it can be tweaked a little bit, but ultimately it needs to be there. Like have some kind of functionality to surface a directory of people or providers or something like that. And you want that on the new site. You want to identify things like that so that as you are going through design, you make sure the design considers those pieces as well. And any kind of integration points that you have, or, filling out a form where you want that data to go. So we'll be talking a lot of the technical things like that, either, before design and after. Sometimes thinking about after we're through design and we're getting ready to launch the site, we know customers are excited about getting the site live, and I would recommend that even after development is done, you take a pretty good amount of time to really go through the site, do your user acceptance testing thoroughly. Make sure all those integration points are there, that they're working. As Dylan mentioned before, thinking about redirects from old URLs to new URLs, SEO, search engine optimizations, so thinking about page titles and descriptions, and also ADA compliance. You need to think about what level of ADA compliance you're going to want to support on your new website. And all of that's easier to do upfront rather than after it's built.
For sure. And that's probably a good segue over to Brady. Brady, we're talking about a discovery and design phase, and we haven't even talked to the designer yet. What up with that? But Brady is a designer and UX guy, and so what are the things that that come into this phase for you?
Well, I mean, when we first get started in this process, the first thing we're going to ask a customer is that if they have their own logo, if they have a style guide, any kind of branding guide to really get us started on the direction of what the overall site is just going to look like. And so it's really important for us to adhere to those things, and even to create, if they don't have a firm style guide that covers a lot of tonal colors to use throughout the site, we're going to come up with those, or any web company needs to come up with those and have some good light colors, some good dark colors, some good colors that pop, and really establish those things from the get-go. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of chaos trying to do that. And then the next thing would be, and Stephen kind of touched on this a little bit, but what is the point of the site? Like, who is your audience? What are your call to actions? You really have to establish what is even the point of doing this. If you're going to have a website, is it just a brochure website to show what you do, or is it really a living, breathing thing that is to pull in more customers, that it's to sell a product. So really getting down and seeing what those details are and figuring out those call to actions so that you don't just have a front page that they land on and it's just a bunch of fluff that nobody's going to actually read. Like, let's put things on there that are going to drive traffic and achieve exactly what you want to achieve on the website. And within that, we're going to be looking at the fundamentals of UX, typography, menu location, those kind of things that, we can always be creative. We can create really cool things, but at the same time, like, you have to think about where people's eyes are drawn to do certain actions. If you're going to log in, if you're going to sign out, usually people are looking traditionally at the top right corner for those things. And you don't always want to break apart from the norms just to do it. Like, you need to think about the customer, and they are there to get the information they need. And the design, even as a designer, I have to say this, is secondary to the experience that they're going through of being on the website themselves. So you really have to have the right team for that, and then the right team for web and mobile to make sure they are optimizing for those things. Because I mean, it's no surprise to anybody that's in the web world or just alive at this point to know that mobile browsing is where it's at, and that's what most people are browsing on. So it's been a while since mobile browsing took over as the predominant way to look at websites. So if you're not considering those things, it's just, you're losing a huge market. And at this point in the game, there's really no point in it if you're not going to design for mobile. And then the next thing I want to mention is investing in design saves money and implementation, because the more we can factor in the designs, the UX, and really think through those processes up front, the more it's going to be easier for the actual developers to implement that stuff. So if we kind of take a lot of assumptions going into it, it's harder for developers to finish an assumed design, because they think in a totally different way than a creative type would. So we have to connect those dots. And when we're creating and designing, we have to think about how a developer is going to read it, because they read it in an entirely different way than a creative type would. So we're always considering those things.
Yeah, Brady, I think that's a great point about the creative review, because a lot of time everyone's liking where the creative direction is going. So they say, yes, this is approved, not really thinking to the end. So it's pretty approved, but they're not thinking into all the minutia of everything. And just like if we go back to that house illustration, it's a lot cheaper to change your architecture drawings than redoing a wall. So it's really important in that creative phase for the project manager, the account team, to really go to the stakeholders and the leadership team to like press that this is the final. There's no going back, even though you can go back and you can change it in dev. My little hint is pretend like you can't.
Yeah,
at least for them to get them to agree to it. So
absolutely. And we've had to deal with that, and I've dealt with that a lot in the past, where you get the customer feedback, they say everything looks good, but they didn't really look at it. They just kind of gave it a little glance, and then we get further into the process and they start wanting to change those things, and they're like really invested at that point. And they're like, okay, now I'm ready to get my hands dirty. And we're kind of at a whole different point than they are if they start commenting on the design and saying, well, actually, what if we change this? Well, that changes the functionality. And then all of a sudden we're going back, way back in the process. So the more that we can get approved earlier in that process, the better it just works for everybody. So that once we get into implementation, it's all developers. And at that point, in an ideal perfect world, which doesn't always happen, the designer would not touch it again after that point. Now, of course, there's always going to be exceptions, but it's good to have those guidelines in place to make everything run smoothly. And within that, we consider like font and image licensing. That's a question we try to ask early on, because the sooner we can get ahead of that, the better. Because once again, in the past, I've had to deal with websites where a designer created designs that they thought looked good, but they weren't even considering font licensing and how that applies to the web, because print and web are two totally different things. You could throw something in print and violate copyrights, and people may not be the wiser because only the people that see it would know. But with the web, you have to be really careful, because those licenses can kind of be tracked in a different way. And if we really want to follow those copyright licenses, you have to consider those things. Gotham Bold or Gotham font, super popular font. A lot of designers love to use it. It is a commercial font, and it is not a cheap commercial font. So we've had to deal with in the past where customers come to us and say, here's the designs, and they use Gotham throughout it. We say, okay, what do you want to do about this? Do you want to purchase a commercial font and use that licensing? And they just had no idea. And by that point, then we have to go, okay, would you like to use a free Google font alternative? And if they're okay with that, great. But on the other hand, we have very similar Google fonts, but they don't match exactly. So you could see things shift a little bit, and all of a sudden the design starts changing just a little bit. And we're going right back to a point where we have to get that reviewed and approved again. So the sooner we can address those concerns about what fonts they're using in the designs, the better. And when it comes to image licensing, it's kind of the same thing. Like, we have to look at the images, if they're supplying those, where did they get them from, and just really help the customer on that process and that journey to how are they acquiring photos. And just because it's royalty free, there's a lot of different licensing things they have to consider about how many page views it can have. Same thing with fonts, like you can have so many page views a month. So there's a lot of ins and outs there that we could really almost do like a separate podcast just about that, because it's very involved. And it's something you really have to consider.
Yeah, and I was going to tack onto that. It's not necessarily licensing, but I've seen images, website designs that feature images the customer doesn't even have. And so they've been functioning on this assumption that the delivery of the website was going to also come with some of the imagery, but they didn't have it in time. And so you have to restructure some of the sizing. So it's also very important that whoever is designing your website, that the images that they're using are something that you can even provide.
Yeah. And the earlier on we had that stuff, the better, because, when you talk about design, if you start throwing up placeholders and there's text on top of the image and they're like, oh yeah, this looks great, and then they change the image and all of a sudden you got text like right over somebody's face, then you go, okay, well, this isn't going to work. So the sooner we know that stuff, the better we can design it up front.
Yeah. And I think
one more time jump in is another important point with that too, is like not just getting your leadership to review the creative, but also get the developers to review it, because they could be reviewing something that's just not even right on the internet. Or my advice is always show the developers and get their input and revisions before any clients or leadership, anyone starts to see it, because they could approve it and then you have to start over again because it didn't work after the developer sees it.
Yeah, we started doing that to where before it even goes to the customer, it goes through a review process with the developer, so that we're not promising something in the design that we can't even implement. And so that's become a really important step.
Sounds like a whole nother podcast we should do at another time. Like a lot we could dive into there. So to keep things moving along here, though, I want to bring Jake in. Jake is our director of marketing, but he gets really involved in our projects in helping with a variety of things like SEO and content migration. And so Jake, kind of tell us some of the things that you're looking out for at the discovery phase.
Sure. Yeah. Janae kind of mentioned it a little bit, but SEO is definitely one of those topics that marketers are, extremely concerned about when they're redesigning their site. So I'd say the first thing is in the discovery design phase. You definitely want to, do a SEO audit. Just really understand your site, understand where there's SEO issues, and then using tools like Moz or SEMrush. There's a bunch of tools out there, but those are kind of the big ones. Um, and then just generating kind of baseline reports in Google Analytics. Again, that's really just to kind of understand things like what's the most popular pages, what's the most popular CTAs, and then also on the flip side, kind of which pages have high bounce rates. I think the more data you have up front, the more you understand your site usage. There could be that data is just very helpful for designers and developers as your project gets started. And then also, once your site launches, that baseline data is really helpful to compare to see, how the redesign went in regards to marketing. So, and then also, Janae mentioned this too, but a plan for redirects. That's probably from the SEO perspective with the redesign. That's like the most important thing you're going to want to focus on. A lot of times you're changing site structure, you're changing the names of URLs. So yeah, just really making sure you're redirecting to the new content on your site, because you're really going to take a hit when it comes to SEO if you don't have those in place. And then guess getting into kind of the MarTech integration. We talked a little bit about integration, but there's a lot of tools that you may use for marketing or for personalization or for tracking user data on your site. So I'd say come up with have a list of that, whether it's in an Excel spreadsheet or a simple checklist, and just making sure that when it comes time to the end of your project, you have all those code snippets in that are tracking any kind of data. Things like Tag Manager, making sure all your tags are set up correctly and will work with the redesign. And then I mentioned personalization, but like if you have any tool for personalization, make sure you have that set up, or just make sure you let the designers and developers know that personalization is something that you plan on doing. Sitefinity has Sitefinity Insight, which is a tool that we're very familiar with and some of our clients use. But that essentially gives you a lot of user data that you can use to personalize content and pages on your site. So I'd say that's probably at a high level most important things that I could think of. If your marketing is more sophisticated, the more platforms you use, the more you're going to have to do ahead of time to plan for those things.
Okay. So the other part that's coming up at some point in this project is going to be the IT side of things. We gotta launch this thing someday and host it, and so there's some things that need to go into sort of just the whole IT side of planning. So Gary, our director of IT, what are the things that you're wanting to know when we're still in discovery?
Yeah, so at this initial kind of design discovery phase, really the important questions are where is each piece of this going to live? So infrastructure is what I'm managing and setting up, and generally in the cloud. It's pretty much all in the cloud now, and Azure is where we host most of our things. So specifically, where's the source code going to live? Is that going to be something that the client has in their environment, or is it something that we, the developer, the development company, are going to host? The deployment pipeline. So CI/CD is always something we use when we're deploying a website from environment to environment, or stage to stage. So where's the deployment pipeline? Where's that continuous deployment pipeline going to live? Is it, again, something we host and manage, or is it something that will live somewhere else? And then each of those environments and stages, usually we call the first one development. So there's a development web app or a website and a database. So again, where's that going to live, and who's going to have access to it, and who's going to manage it? And then oftentimes that's usually what we look at first. But then we do like to think, okay, where is this going to be hosted eventually? Because we can do some of those things early if it's going to be hosted with us, or we can get with the company that's hosting it and begin those connections and begin forming those relationships so that we can connect the pipeline out to, say, a staging site and then the production environment. So there's a lot of those questions that have to be answered. And then on top of that, wherever it's hosted, who's going to need ongoing access to it, right? So obviously we will, since we're doing most of the code, but sometimes the client has other companies that they want to bring in to do various other pieces, reviews, or just a legal kind of thing, or there's just all these different things. And so people might need access to source code or development or the different environments. So that's generally where I come in for the design and discovery is cloud infrastructure and where are all these assets going to live.
Yeah, because that's obviously important things to know up front, because we've got to be planning for that throughout the whole process of implementation and everything else. So as you folks can see, there's a lot of things we could dive a lot deeper into, and we'll have some episodes where we'll dive much deeper into some of the things we hit on today. But and here we're just in discovery and design. So what we'll hit on the next installment is implementation. What are the things that you can expect, during the implementation phase of the project? And we'll have some of these folks back and some different folks join us at that point as well. So I hope you'll join us for that episode. Thanks to all you that were on here with us today to help us explain this to everybody. And we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to Smooth Musings. If you liked today's episode, make sure to subscribe, share it with someone, and rate us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. This podcast is presented by Smooth Fusion. If you'd like more information about Smooth Fusion and how we help our customers with websites, custom software, and more, go to www.smoothfusion.com.